can find you somebody to help you if you want. If you got your Bibles, we're going to go to Revelation chapter 17 tonight. Clay's passing out a new study guide. As he's doing that, before we get into 17, let me just recap real quick the last couple of chapters we've been on. We're kind of on a homeward stretch, believe it or not. I've got an ambitious goal tonight, and that's to cover almost 2 chapters of Revelation. So y'all are laughing at me already. So we'll see. We'll see. If you remember Revelation 16, it kind of contains the vision of the pouring out of the 7 bowls of wrath, which were symbolic of God's judgment on Rome. If you remember, the first 4 bowls were general ones, kind of like the seals, kind of like the trumpets. They dealt with the land, they dealt with the seas, they dealt with the river and the fresh water, they dealt with the sun. And then these final 3 bowls were intended to call Rome specifically into judgment. Okay? Well, Revelation 17 and 18 is kind of like, okay, the scene was set, and now 17 and 18, we're going to zoom in and take a close look at what these bowls actually looked like, okay, and what happened, or what's already happened, so to speak. It's going to talk about the fall of the city of Rome. It's, again, using symbolism. It's going to compare Rome to a great harlot that's being punished for her immoralities. Revelation 19, we're going to see the rejoicing of the saints. We're going to see the fall of the harlot. Revelation 19, 11 through 20 is going to picture the fall of the dragon, the beast, the false prophet, everything that stood against the church, everything that stood against these people of God for the entire book. We're coming to the end of the prophecy in which God takes care of them. Now, again, remember, almost every symbol that we see in Revelation is tied to an Old Testament text. This is something that these New Testament Christians in these 7 churches, which, again, don't forget, the purpose of the Revelation was not written for Rome. It was written for the faithfulness or the unfaithfulness of those within those 7 churches. It was written for their edification. It was written for their encouragement that they would be within the scope of God's judgment on Rome, and as a result, things were going to happen, but they needed to understand the judgment was not coming upon them, it was coming upon Rome. Okay? And tonight we'll see historically maybe how that played out. Again, if you need the background text, go read Isaiah 1, Isaiah 13, Isaiah 23, Isaiah 47, Jeremiah 50 and 51, Daniel chapter 7, which we'll go to tonight. All of these texts, Ezekiel 27, Nahum chapter 3, all these texts is where most of the symbolism from Revelation is drawn from. So these people would be familiar with it. Okay? So kind of with that set, let's jump into chapter 17. Let's start in verse 1. Let me get over there. I think I got a picture of her. I do. It says, Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, Come, and I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and with the wine of whose sexual immorality the dwellers on the earth have become drunk. And he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations, the impurities of her sexual immorality. And on her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. Okay, kind of an eerie picture, if you will, but this description of this harlot, again, this is all symbolism, all right? And this harlot represents something, and the mere fact of how she's dressed and what she's sitting on, it's all symbolism, and it all tells us something about what's going on. It tells us that she was probably this commercial, worldly, very successful figure, which, again, is an allusion to Rome, in and of itself. She was a seductress. She was a prostitute. It says the woman sitting on the scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. We're talking, she's sitting upon the beast. You remember a couple of chapters ago where we saw these 2 beasts come. We saw one come from the earth. We saw one come out of the sea. This is a description of the beast that came out of the sea, which represents the civil power of Rome. So she is seated upon Rome itself. Okay, in the text, it refers to her in many different ways. I'll just run down through there. I think it's on your handout. She was sitting on 7 hills in verse 9. Maybe we haven't got quite that far yet. Verse 18 will tell us that she ruled the whole earth. Verse 6, chapter 18, verse 20, verse 24 tells us that this woman persecuted the saints. Verse 3 and verse 11 through 19 tells us that she was the leading commercial city of her day. We see the allusion to a city. This is not about a woman. Okay? Chapter 17, verse 16 and 17 is going to tell us that she was destroyed by her own military power, that she was a seductive woman, a mystery, the mother of prostitutes, the abominations of the earth, verse 5 says. Okay? Now notice what the angel tells to John. He says, come and I will show you what's going to happen, the punishment of the great prostitute. Well, first she's described as, again, the great prostitute. And you need to understand, in Isaiah chapter 23, verse 16 and 17, the city of Tyre is referred to as a prostitute. Again, these people understand the imagery. They understand the illusion that's going on here. Okay? She said she was sitting on many waters. Go back to the prophet Jeremiah in Jeremiah 51, verse 13. In that day, he's talking about a city who sits on many waters and are rich in treasures. Your end has come, the time for you to be cut off. We see this back and forth to the Old Testament, this imagery that they would have got. So we understand what the vision is telling us. We can understand it. And she's already got this label as the world's party girl, so to speak. Okay? All the nations of the earth come to her to do what? Whatever they want. Nothing's out of bounds. Nothing's out of bounds. Okay? Drunk on her immorality, drunk on her abominations, her wickedness, verse 8 is going to tell us. So he's led to the desert to see this queen of wickedness in her judgment, and he sees her sitting on this beast covered with these blasphemous names that has 7 heads and 10 horns. Again, this is the exact description of the sea beast we saw a few chapters ago, okay, from chapter 13. She had all of the support of Rome's military might behind her. So they understand when John sees this who he's talking about. Which is important because the bowls are being poured out, what are we actually talking about? Judgment. And judgment's coming upon her. And in their minds, as they're putting this picture together, what's the message to them? Judgment's coming on who? It's coming on Rome. Okay? So as much as you want to cower down to Rome, as much as you want to sacrifice your faith to Rome, as much as you want to call Caesar Lord, understand judgment's coming on Caesar. Judgment's coming on Rome. God is the one that's in control. Okay? We see this picture. She's in purple. She's in scarlet, which indicates what? Royalty. Okay? And Rome would put off a vestige of itself that says there's nobody greater than us. Okay? I mean, we are at the pinnacle. We are nobody's bigger, better, greater, more powerful than we are. Okay? So it's all an image to get us to see. But she's also dressed as a prostitute. It's interesting to note that just by how she was dressed, John could understand that. Okay? Which hasn't changed a whole lot from today. I mean, it's pretty obvious sometimes, right? He could see by what he saw that was her condition. And don't miss the fact that she was royally drunk. Okay? But drunk on what? Blood of the saints. The blood of those who bore the testimony of Jesus. I find this interesting. Okay? How full is her cup? Says it's full, right? When did judgment come upon? When the bowls of wrath were what? full. They were poured out when the bowls of God's wrath were full. I don't know if that's a play on words. I don't know if that's a symbolism we're to see. But as soon as her cup is filled with the blood of the saints, God's cup of wrath is full and is ready to be poured out on top of them. It's also that same imagery of, you're going to reap what you sow as well, which we'll see over and over and over and over. Okay, let's keep going. Any questions? Any thoughts real quick? We understand who we're talking about. That's kind of the main point of this right now. Okay? Well, that's interesting because what was one of the claims of early Christianity? That we were cannibals. Okay, why? Because we came together every Sunday to do what? Eat flesh and drink blood. Okay, I mean that's just one of the stories that got out. Okay, here, she's drunk on the blood of the saints. Let's keep going. Look at verse 7. I'm going to jump back and grab the last half of verse 6, though, because it says this. When I saw her, this is still John talking. When I saw her, I marveled greatly. Probably the understatement of the year if you saw this walking around the desert. Okay, I marveled. But the angel said to me, why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast with the 7 heads and 10 horns that carries her. The beast that you saw was and is not, and is about to rise from the bottomless pit and go to destruction. And the dwellers on the earth whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world will marvel to see the beast, because it was and is not and is to come. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. There are also 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen. One is, the other has not yet come, and when he does come, he must remain only a little while. Does this sound like one of those things on Facebook? Let's see how smart you are. Figure this stuff out. Okay. Let's see. Verse 11. As for the beast that was and is not, it is an 8th, but it belongs to the 7, and it goes to destruction. And the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received royal power, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour together with the beast. They are of one mind, and they hand over their power and authority to the beast. They will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them, for he is the Lord of lords and King of kings, and those with him are called and chosen and faithful. Okay. This is one of my favorite parts of Revelation, by the way. Okay. Especially when we start piecing it all out. Again, try to imagine what John saw. He was greatly astonished. And then the angel says, don't get caught up in what you're seeing. Let me explain this to you. Okay. Now, his explanation to us sounds very convoluted. It's like who was and who is not and who is to come, and then the 7th and then the 8th, and it's like what's he talking about? Okay. Understand the beast here has a 3-fold history. Once was, now is not, will come up out of the abyss, and then go to destruction. We'll talk through it. The beast in the 1st century was the persecutor of the saints. Now we're going to get into history a little bit. Okay, the first real persecutor of Christianity in the church was what? Caesar. Anybody know? Now, those are not the first Caesar. The first Caesar is Augustus on your sheet. The first Caesar who persecuted the church is Nero. Nero was the first one that we know of, kind of an all-out attack. Now, let me just say something real quick, and I'm going to say it again in a minute. Do not confuse persecution of Christianity with military action taken upon Judea, because they are not the same. They are not the same. Okay? Which we'll get into in a little bit. Vespasian is the emperor in AD 70 when the temple falls. And you remember that whole scene when he enters the temple. Jesus even talks about that when the abomination of desolation is seen standing in the temple. I think he's talking about when Vespasian comes and ransacks the temple and basically has a pork barbecue in the middle of the temple. Okay? But don't misconstrue Christian persecution with a military action on Judea and Judaism, because at this point in time in history, Christianity and Judaism are what? Two separate groups. They are not the same. Okay? They are not the same. As a matter of fact, when did Israel, physical Israel, cease to be the sole children of God? When did that happen? Resurrection, yeah, the cross, 3 days later. When the temple veil is torn in half, we see the fulfillment of the law. We see Christ ushering in a new covenant in and of himself that is now no longer with physical Israel, but with who? Whoever. Christianity begins on that Easter Sunday. Well, I mean, to me, it's the cross, it's the death, the burial, and the resurrection together. It's the gospel story that ended the covenant, the Mosaical covenant ended at the cross. Okay? The new covenant under Christ began when he walked out of that tomb on that resurrection morning. Okay? And from then on, God's people are, now, they could be Jews who become Christians. We say that on the day of Pentecost. Obviously, most of those 3,000 who obeyed the gospel were most likely Jews. They were Jews nationally. Okay? But now, spiritually, they are Christian, if you want to use that term. Okay? So, again, as we get into this, don't confuse the persecution of the Jews, because the Jews have their own history politically and nationally, separate and apart from Christianity. Okay? Now, Nero was the first to attack Christians. Now, there was a time in Rome when all of the Jews were expelled from Rome. Okay? But guess what? If you were a Jew who had converted to Christianity, were you expelled from Rome? Yeah, you were. Because it was a national expulsion. It wasn't a religious expulsion. It was you're Jewish by nationality. You have to get out. And even if you were a Jewish by nationality who had converted to Christianity, you still got kicked out of Rome. Okay? So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. But Nero is the first to actively persecute Christians. We hear about him in his gardens. He would use them to light his Christians. He would dip them in oil and impale them and stick them in his gardens and use them as night lights. Okay. Some of the things he did was atrocious. Okay, so that's the one who was. Okay. Then we have one who was not. The beast represented by now is not. That's going to refer to Titus and Vespasian. Again, like I said, don't confuse the fact that Vespasian, and understand, this is father and son. Titus is Vespasian's son. Titus on your sheet of paper, I think, is number, I don't remember where they fall, 6 and 7? No, I mean in order of Caesars. I think they're 6 and 7 in the order. You know what? I have it up here. Yeah, it's up here. 6 and 7. Vespasian was emperor first, and then Titus, his son, became emperor after him. Okay? But also understand, when it says the one who was, Nero, persecuted Christians, Vespasian and Titus did not. Did not. They kind of took a hands-off approach to the whole Christianity thing and basically said, you know what? Do your own thing. Now, they weren't pro-Christianity. They just weren't attacking it. They just weren't attacking it. Okay? So there was a time period in between Nero and what will eventually be the beast, Domitian, that comes when there was no persecution. That was when there was not. And then there was one who would come. Don't forget, though, Domitian would rise to power only so that God would make his fall even more graphic. He would only be allowed to do what God allowed him to do to prove God's point. He's described twice in this one verse. The beast once was, now is not, and yet will come. Okay? Go ahead, Darryl. Okay, we're going to get to that. We're going to get to that because we're going to go to Daniel in just a minute. Okay, let me just go ahead and explain it now because since we're already on here and we'll talk about it. In Daniel, let's just go over there. Daniel chapter 7. If you remember, we've gone to Daniel several times. Daniel has a vision of these 4 different beasts that represent 4 different kingdoms that were going to rise. And Daniel's paid special attention to the 4th beast, which we know represents Rome. Okay? Now, listen to this description. I'm in chapter 7. I'm going to start in verse 23. Okay? Then he said, as for the 4th beast, there shall be a 4th kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all the kingdoms. It shall devour the whole earth and trample it down and break it to pieces. As for the 10 horns, he's describing what the beast looked like. It had 10 horns. Out of this kingdom 10 kings shall arise, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the former ones. He shall be put down 3 kings. Okay, so a total. There's 10, one to come after. How many is that? 11. But he's going to put 3 of them, or 3 will be put down. Okay. He shall speak with words of the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times and the law, and they shall be given into his hand for a time and half a time. Okay, so in Daniel's vision, and there's a lot of people that say, okay, Daniel's vision and John's vision don't match up, because John's talking about 8 kings or 8 horns or 8 rulers, and Daniel's talking about 11. How do you get there? Okay, well, if we go look at history, okay, the first 5 are very well known. Everybody knows about Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero. I mean, they were big. Because if you look at and I put them up here on purpose, if you look at the length of time they served as emperor, it matters, right? Augustus is in there for 27, 30, 40, almost 41 years, okay? Tiberius is in there for 23 years. Caligula, now it doesn't surprise me, he's only in there for 4. Claudius is in there for 13 years. Nero reigns for 14 years. And then Rome goes into a civil war, okay? An internal civil war. And if you notice, the next 3 emperors, the totality of their reign is just a little over a year. All 3 of them. You've got the first one, Galba, who reigns for what? 6 months from June of 68, and that's not 1968, that's actually 68. It's so weird to type that because I'm used to, you know what I'm saying? Okay, Galba only reigns for 6 months. He's overthrown in the coup by Otho, who then goes from January to April, who's then overthrown by Vitellius, who goes from April to December. So, I mean, these 3, it's basically you got 3 emperors who reign for basically a little year and a half, until Vespasian comes along. And historically, okay, if you were to ask anybody in that culture to name off who was the emperors, they would give you the list on the right. Because the 3 in the middle didn't count for anything. It's kind of like a political ploy that happened in the middle of this turmoil. They weren't there long enough to even assert themselves and get their name out. Now, in Daniel's revelation, he understands there's going to be 11 of them. Historically, John gives us the 8 that the people of these 7 churches would know full well about. Okay? And also understand here, the history we're talking about here, okay? We're talking about 27 BC to what? 96 AD. 120 years. Okay? That's pretty well-known history. I mean, I think we pretty well know our last history for the last 120 years, don't we? That would put us back, what, into the Civil War? Maybe? No? 1900, basically. Okay? But, I mean, we have a good understanding of what went on in the last 120 years. So would these 7 churches. Okay? Paul? Right.
They printed coins.
Right.
So they weren't even in office long enough to really even start making coins.
Didn't have.
They didn't even know who they were because
They never saw a coin with their picture on them. Yeah, that's a good point. And also carved into statues. That's how we have representations of most of the Caesars. We have busts of them that have survived, that we know what they look like. Okay. So when he says there was once who is that? Nero. And then there was those who were not. Vespasian, Titus in the middle, and one who is to come, which would be Domitian. Hadn't shown his head yet. Okay. Then he talks about 10 kings. Okay. The 10 horns. I also want to point this out. she's sitting on a beast, 7 heads. He mentions 7 hills. Anybody know the topography of Rome? It's called the city of 7 hills. Matter of fact, there is a festival every year in which they celebrate the fact that Rome is encompassed by 7 hills. That's one of the reasons why they picked the spot they did, because the hills made it more defensible. Okay, just in case there's any doubt in our minds about who we're talking about. Okay, and that's why I said from the get-go, the interpretation of Revelation, if you look at it historically and you don't go chasing off a whole bunch of crazy tangents about stuff, it makes sense. Okay, it's not difficult to understand. It's not difficult to piece together. It wouldn't have been difficult for them to piece together because they were living it. Okay? So we get this. Now, he talks about 10 horns or 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but who for 1 hour will receive authority as kings. All right. Everybody kind of understands the way Rome operated in the empire. Obviously, Rome, being located where it was geographically, okay, had difficulty controlling all the points of the empire. So what would they do? They would go to this point in the empire, this center section of the empire, and they would appoint a vassal king, or they would appoint somebody who would be in charge of that area. Now, who would that have been when, let's say, when Jesus was crucified? Herod. Herod would be a vassal king, king of Jerusalem in title only, but loyal to who? Loyal to Rome. Matter of fact, he couldn't do anything without Rome's approval. And everything he did, he had to do with the fear of Rome's reprisal sitting on top of him. That's why he didn't want to have anything to do with Jesus. Right? Send him back to Pilate. I don't have anything to do with this. Okay? So understand that the empire is made up, and there's these 10 vassal kings. Now, these vassal kings are going to come back and bite them in the end. We'll see that in a minute. Okay? They're sub-rulers who, although dependent upon Rome, they're going to end up being Domitian's vassals, okay? So we see the empowerment of this harlot. We see the power that she derives from the one she is sitting upon, and really they're all interconnected. We're all talking about the same thing. All right, let's pick it up back in 15, okay? Any questions, any thoughts? Make sense? Kind of clicking? Okay? A little less scary, maybe? Okay? Then going into this? Okay. Got to get around that chapter. Verse 15. Then the angel said to me, the waters that you saw, where the prostitute is seated, all peoples and multitudes and nations and languages, and the 10 horns that you saw, remember the vassals? They and the beast will hate the prostitute. They will make her desolate and naked and devour her flesh and burn her up with fire. For God has put into their hearts to carry out his purpose by being of one mind and handing over their royal power to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. Again, who's in control? God, until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman that you saw is the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth. It's almost like that last statement is like, okay, unless you haven't figured it out by now, okay, I'm just going to tell you, it's the great city that rules everything. And in the first century, who would that have been? Rome. There's no doubt. There's no doubt. Okay? The waters where the woman was sitting represented the people, the nations, the languages. She's sitting on a wicked world, which would come to hate her. As a matter of fact, the world that she governed would end up doing what? Kill her, be the cause of her downfall. Now, you can go back and read all kinds of histories about Rome and try to figure out how it fell, and you will see all kinds of influences coming from outside in. Yes, internal moral decay set the stage, but she had tremendous pressures. Her military was stretched on all kinds of fronts, and as a result, Rome falls completely apart. Okay? Now, also remember, all of this that we're talking about is written in what kind of language? Apocalyptic, which means it is all symbolic, it's figurative, okay? Don't forget that, okay? That's important. All right. Don't forget also what it says. All of this is part of God's purpose in giving the beast power to rule until his words, God's words, are fulfilled, okay? And also understand, it was common knowledge in that day that Rome was wicked, that it was immoral, that it was ungodly. Okay? We're not shaming people who thought, we're holding Rome in high regard at all. Okay? Let's keep trucking. All right, 18:1. I told you I was going to get into 2. After this, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth that was made bright with his glory. And he called out with a mighty voice, Fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place for demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable beast. For all nations have drunk the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed immorality with her, and the merchants of earth have grown rich from the power of her luxurious living. Then I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, lest you take part in her sins, lest you share in her plagues, for her sins are heaped high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Okay, so we get this first angel that comes, not just any other angel. He comes with he's in splendor, he's got this mighty voice, and he's got this powerful message. And understand what he says. This is important. He doesn't say Babylon is going to fall. What does he say? Fallen, past tense. Who is the only being that can speak in past tense of what hasn't happened yet? God. Okay? Only God can talk about in the past tense what he has not yet done. He's letting his people know it's not a matter of if Babylon falls or if Rome falls. It is already set. It's already done. Romans 4:17 says, God who gives life to the dead and calls things that are not as though they were. In other words, things that haven't happened yet, he calls as if they have. That's omniscience. To God, a day is like what? 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day. Time to God doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. It's just a fact of his being. And what great comfort this announcement would have been for the saints. Remember, this announcement was being announced before the woman had begun her push against God's people. Even before Domitian begins in full force his efforts to destroy the church, God has already pronouncing judgment upon the one who's going to do it. Okay? That ought to give us some cause for comfort. Note the description. It's the third time in the book of Revelation for this description. She's become a home for demons, a haunt for every evil spirit, unclean, detestable bird. It just goes on and on and on. In other words, it's almost as if saying, in case you're wondering if my bowl was actually really full or not, let me tell you what it was full with. Okay? Let me tell you what my bowls of wrath were full up with. And here you go. Here you go. Okay? First, he hears a voice of condemnation upon the woman. All the wickedness of hell and earth resided in her. She was going to fall because of her adulteries. Nineveh and Babylon are both described as a prostitute or a harlot who ruled the world and needed to be judged. You can go look at Nahum chapter 3 or Isaiah chapter 10. This woman was also going to fall because of her merchandising, what she was selling to the world. She was a powerful woman whose luxuries enabled the world to become rich. The city of Tyre in Ezekiel 27 is referred to as a luxurious woman who made all the merchants of the earth rich. Again, the comparison between the two. But then John hears another voice, okay? And the other voice is a voice to the people of God. And the voice to the people of God is what? What's said? Come out. Modern day language, get out. Why? Yeah. What happens when you surround yourself with that kind of description, that kind of wickedness, that kind of evil, that kind of immorality, that kind of lust, that kind of greed? What happens to you when you surround yourself with something like that on a regular basis? It corrupts you, right? Yeah, he tells, well, yeah, exactly. Genesis chapter 19, right? Sodom and Gomorrah. You remember the conversation? You remember the angels show up at Abraham's house? Well, first they show up at Abraham's house, and Abraham has a conversation because they tell him, we're going to go down and we're going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham knows his nephew Lot lives down there, right? And Abraham gets into this bartering match with these guys. He says, what if I find 40 righteous men? Okay, sure, we won't destroy it. Well, what if I find 35? Sure. Well, hang on. What if there's just 30? Would you not destroy it if there's 30? And the angels go, what? Sure. Go find 30. And then, I don't know if I got the numbers right, but anyway, he's working his way down. And finally, what number does Abraham settle on? Takes it all the way down to 10. If we can just find 10 righteous people now, we're talking about a huge city. A huge city. 2 cities. This is Dallas-Fort Worth kind of place, right? I'm not saying Dallas and Fort Worth or Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay, well, maybe I am. No, I'm not kidding. No, I'm not. Because the Cowboys are there, so it can't be bad. What?
And his wife and kids and spouses were a majority of that 10.
That's it. You add them all up, and well, no, there couldn't have been 10. If he found 10, they wouldn't have destroyed it. But they were most of the 10. And then you remember what happens. The angels come into town, and immediately Lot sees them and goes, hey, guys, you need to come into my house. I mean, right off the bat. Doesn't interview them. He sees them. Y'all need to come in my house. And they said, no, you know what? We'll just sleep out here in the town square. Lot's going, you don't know where you live. You don't know where you live. You got to come in my house. And you remember the story. They come into the house, and then it says, here's the interesting part about this. It says, every man of the city came because they wanted to know them. Okay? Now, if you want to go back and read Genesis 1 through 19 before you get to 19 and understand every time that word know is used, then you will know exactly what kind of knowing was taking place. Okay? Adam knew Eve, and we got Cain and Abel. You understand what's going on? Okay? And so Lot sitting there, and he's got these guys, and the men of the city are coming. And now here's the other amazing thing about that story. I'm not saying Lot's righteous, but although he's referred to in the Bible as righteous. What does Lot do? But here's the amazing thing about that. What's the condition of his 2 daughters? Yeah. Now, I don't know what kind of parenting Lot's doing, but to have 2 virgin daughters in a culture like that, unless nobody really was paying any attention to the girls. I don't know. I don't want to read too much into it. But regardless, Lot offers him his daughters. And yet, but what we see, what happened? What does God end up doing? He blinds them all, and they go back to their place. But then, eventually, God comes in judgment of both, right? What's that? Had to drag him out, yeah. Didn't want to go, right? But the whole time, the message is what? Come out. Get out of there. Not a place for you to be. Matter of fact, if I remember the story correctly, Abraham warned Lot about going there to begin with. Not a good place for you to be.
There's a phrase that starts out where he says, the grass looked greener, and he pitched his tent
Towards Sodom. Right, that's right. Yeah. He starts off, towards Sodom, and then he ends up in the middle of town. But that's what the seductiveness of sin has the power to do in our lives. You see, what we do is we say, okay, I'm going to keep sin over there. And then I get a little bit closer to it, and all of a sudden it starts pulling me in further and further and further and further until, like Lot, I'm city center. And the message now, even coming here, as judgment's about to fall on Rome, to the Christians, even there, is what? Get out. And the message is the same for us. If we find ourselves in situations where we are surrounded by or centered in the presence of sin or wickedness or debauchery or any of these things we've been talking about, we need to do what? We need to get out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Paul talks about this quite a bit.
Let's just read it. Let's just read it. Separate. That's exactly right. This will be the perfect place to stop. Let's go there. 2 Corinthians chapter 6. Right. Now, we use this phrase right off the bat to apply to marriage a lot of times, but I think it really applies in all relationships. Okay? He starts off in verse 14. Do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. For what partnership has righteousness with lawlessness? Or what fellowship has light with darkness? What accord has Christ with Belial? Or what portion does a believer share with an unbeliever? What agreement has the temple of God with idols? For we are the temple of the living God. As God said, I will make my dwelling among them, I will walk among them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Therefore go out from their midst, and be separate from them, says the Lord, and touch no unclean thing. Then I will welcome you, and I will be a father to you, and you will be sons and daughters to me, says the Lord God Almighty. Since we have these promises, beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from every defilement of body and spirit, bringing holiness to completion in the fear of God. Okay, here's the thing. I totally understand the mission of the church. And the mission of the church is to go into the world and take the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ to a lost and dying world. And I fully understand that the world we are going into is wicked and depraved and evil and full of all kinds of sin. I understand that. And I understand that we as Christians are called to go to those very people with the message of Jesus Christ. But at the same time, we are also called to be separate from those people. To be different than those people, to look different, to act different, to talk different, to marry different, to do our vocations differently. Why? Because we're different than the world. And I know there's been a push over the last 20, 30 years, especially in Christendom, to say, well, we need to look more like the world in order to attract the world. No, we don't. We don't. Here's the thing. If we look just like the world's already got that. We got nothing different to offer. But when we are set apart, now, here's the difference. We are set apart, but not better than. And that's where we kind of mess up sometimes. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We all were in the exact same boat. Now, some of us have chosen not to remain in that boat. We've gotten out of that boat and into another boat. The boat with Jesus in it. But we were all in the same boat. Okay? But as Christians, we are called to be different, to be set apart. And when he tells the churches, when he's telling these 7 churches, listen, I understand this wickedness is all around you, but if you can, you need to get out of it. That's what Paul is telling them here. Okay?
Somewhere Paul says exactly what you just said, too. He says we can't physically come out. I'm not talking about physically.
Well, Jesus' prayer in John 17, when he's praying for the disciples, he said, I don't pray that you take them out of the world because they have to be in the world as my followers, but I pray that you protect them from the evil one. Okay? And we can protect ourselves from the evil one as well.
And that we all become one.
Right. Yeah.
Which is the separation.
Yeah. That's his prayer in John 17, that we be one like he and the Father are one. Well, we can't be one with holiness if we're living in unholiness. Okay? Understanding that our holiness comes from our relationship with Jesus. Tonight, we're going to sing a song. That's about it for tonight. I didn't make it all the way through, but that's all right. Don't want to rush it. But if you need anything tonight in your walk with Jesus, if you need prayers, if you need support, whatever you need, know we're always available and we'll do whatever we can, whenever we can. And I also want to throw this out to you. If you're online watching this, of course, it's only going to apply to you if you're live. Actually, you're not. We'll take them anytime. If you're watching this online and you have prayer requests, type them in. We'll make sure we pray over those. Okay? Send them to the office. Okay? I know some of you have been separated for a long time. If you've got concerns that you would like us to pray over, let us know. Whatever you need, though, tonight, here, let us know as we stand and as we sing.